Hello, everyone. My name is Craig Silveira. I am a database migration specialist for AWS, part of the Database Freedom Program. I'll explain what Database Freedom is. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the tools that are going to help you along the way of your journey to achieve database freedom, right? Yeah, a lot of you I know just sat through Dave's presentation talking about how to plan for enterprise-wide migrations. He introduced you to some of the tools. I'm going to go into more detail of each of those tools, explaining how to use these tools as you're going through each step of the migration process. So what is Database Freedom? Database Freedom is a program that we created here at AWS to help customers that are looking for ways to get off of commercial databases onto a more cloud-friendly database that will hopefully make your administration a lot easier and, of course, save you money. Right, so there's three pillars of our Database Freedom program. First, there's innovation. Right, I'm going to be talking about some of the tools that we created to help you easily, or as easy as possible, move from one database platform to another. There's other things that have come out of direct involvement with Database Freedom about creating new instance types in AWS that are to help you have more choices to pick the right size instance, whether it's compute heavy, memory heavy, to meet the needs of your applications. The second tenet or pillar of our program is expertise. So our team is made up of people that have been there, done it. All right, I've been helping people migrate from one database to another for the last 22 years. The last 13 of them migrating to Postgres. All right, so and I'm ex-Oracle, so I know when I talk Oracleese, and I've migrated a lot of Sci-based databases over to Oracle, so I understand things like SQL Server can help you understand what this transition is going to look like. But it's not just me. We have a team that we're building. It's called MAS, Migration as a Service, and it's a team of engineers that as you are learning about this whole process of migration, we're going to be there to educate you. We're going to help you do the database inventory, excuse me, that Dave was talking about, but where you do some analysis of all the databases across your enterprise to figure out which are the good candidates to be migrated. And then, of course, help you pick a couple applications to do a POC in. All right? You're not going to dive in head first. You're going to test it, and we have the resources that are going to be there to hold your hand and help you through that proof of concept. Okay? The third pillar of our Database Freedom program are what we call programs, but in those we have these official workshops. So if you're interested in exploring Database Freedom, we can do a 2-day on-site workshop where the workshop agenda includes things like education, if you have an idea of what the target database you want to move to or might move to. So we can do, like I do, in-depth Postgres training. If you want to learn about going to other databases, we have the resources that we can bring in there. The other thing that we do in the workshop is we start to do the analysis of that database inventory that you collect, and we'll talk about a tool that'll be used to collect that, and then figure out the categorization that, as Dave was mentioned, or I'm going to go into more detail, the WQF or Workload Qualification framework, so you can identify the easy, the medium, and the hard systems. All right. There's incentives as far included in the program. So we know that when you're migrating from one database to another, there's a period of time you're running both systems are in parallel. There's extra cost. So we have incentives to kind of offset those costs, as well as incentives to fund if you want to work with a partner to do some of this work. There is some funding available. So if you're interested in this program, come talk to me after the presentation or any of the other AWS people in the room. All right, so what tools are, just takes a second, what tools are available? All right. There are 3 basic tools you're going to be using as you begin your migration journey from AWS. All of them were built to make it as easy as possible for you to migrate over, right? It's not a big easy button, right? I wouldn't lie to you. Migrations take work. You heard, if you sat through Dave's presentation, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of iterative work that needs to be done to be successful in a migration, and we can't emphasize enough how important testing is. Right? Test, 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 and test some more. Right? People always underestimate the level of testing required to be successful during a migration. But anyway, the tools that are going to help automate as much of the process as possible include our WQF tool that was just released back in December. This is the tool that you would use to do the high-level inventory of your enterprise and kind of give it a rough estimate of the overall effort, and we'll look into that in more detail. You have your schema conversion tool that once you decide, whether it's a POC or an actual migration, you want to start converting, that's the tool you're going to use to convert your schema objects, your tables, your data, the tables, the constraints, the indexes, and then as well as your PL SQL or Transact SQL over to, in this case, I'll always talk about Postgres as the equivalent of the languages. All right. Lastly, you have the database migration service, and this tool, once you've converted your schema, you need a way to move the data over. And there's lots of manual ways, and there's other tools that you can use, but we've created the database migration service to help take a snapshot, migrate your base data over. It also can run in CDC mode, so you can keep these two databases in sync. So you have, active current data set. So as you're testing, you can compare your source system and with your new target system. All right, when are you going to use these tools? Obviously, we're focusing on migration, all right? But you can also use these tools if it's not a migration, you're starting new in the AWS cloud. You're modernizing an application or building a new application that is cloud ready, right? You can still use these tools to assist you in that way. DMS is a great way if you're pulling in data from various sources and you're consolidating into a new system that you're building. Use DMS to do that. It can load from multiple sources into a single target, right? And then if you have systems that you want to do ongoing replication, you can use the CDC method of DMS to do log-based capture of the source systems and replicate over to your new target database system. So these tools, we're talking about them in the context of migration, but they have multiple uses. Okay, where do each of these tools fit into the process? Here, just showing a little bit of a busy slide, and if you sat through Dave's, he kind of showed his step one was my step two, and vice versa. The first part of the migration process is you're going to be planning and taking your inventory, right? And Dave showed you. If you've worked with any AWS employees, we used to have a spreadsheet that you would manually fill out for each system you were considering migrating, right? That's a very tedious process. So we've been working to automate that process to be able to capture that data and consolidate that data and generate reports that mean something to you, right? So that's what this WQF tool that we launched back in December does. You provided connection information to the source databases. All right, and you can do that interactively, or you can bulk load a bunch of parameters or connection strings into it, and it'll go out there and it'll create these reports that you use for that inventory and the migration estimate analysis. The second tool, SCT, is what you're going to use to actually convert your schema, your tables, and as well as your code objects. And then, of course, you're going to use DMS to migrate the data. Right? Whether it's a one-time migration or you might use it for the ongoing replication. Now you see at the bottom here, you can see if you're going from a source data warehousing system, you might not be using DMS to do that. Depending on the source database, like Netezza, DMS doesn't support Netezza as a source, but our SCT tool has these things called data extractors, which you would use to migrate your data from one of those data warehousing products to the new AWS target database. So let's dig into WQF. All right. As I mentioned, we're gonna look at the inventory that it collects. We're gonna look at the migration estimates that it produces. Right. Those are the two main purposes of WQF to help automate this process. Because if you're only talking about migrating one or two systems, it's very easy to collect, gather data by hand. But we are dealing with customers that have hundreds, if not thousands, of database systems out there, right? And they're trying to collect an inventory. So, they've asked us for a while now to produce a tool that can just go out, they'll give the connection information, and it'll go out, it'll capture the data and summarize it in, whatever format for whatever audience that you want to present the data to. So we created WQF to aid in that process. Now, when WQF goes through its process, it assigns these categorizations, right? This workload qualification framework, right? Forgive me if folks sat through Dave's presentation hearing this again, but the goal here is that, based on our experience and trying the best that we can to gauge the level of difficulty of migrating an application from an existing database to a new database, we've created these categories, right? One is a very simple system to migrate. It uses open connectivity, open source, type of friendly, or database agnostic, basically, right? You're using the database as a data store. You don't have business logic in the database. Those systems can be migrated extremely easy between any databases, right? Not just ours, right? It's just a fact. As you move up, you're obviously starting to make use of more of the proprietary features of that source database, whichever database it is, right? And your number of objects in the database increase, the usage of business logic inside of the database increases. And as you put more and more of those features and use those capabilities of those source databases, the migration ultimately can become more difficult, all right? Doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just different levels of difficulty, all right? Until you get to like category 5 are the systems that you're probably not going to be able to port, right? So what's really important is identifying those systems early on so you don't spend your time analyzing them only to find out it's a third-party application that has absolutely no Postgres support. You're not going to migrate that. You may enter into conversations with that application vendor and bring AWS into it to try and get the vendor to port over to Postgres, but those projects take an awful long time, right? So you're going to start, as Dave had mentioned, you're going to start with some of the easier. I always recommend start with the middle of the road one, right? You start with something too easy, you don't learn that much. Of course, if you start with something too hard, it's too difficult, looks impossible, no one's going to be on board doing this on large scale. Pick something middle of the road because you want a challenge, because the issues that you run into and you learn to overcome those issues, chances are that pattern that you apply will be applicable to other systems within your inventory, right? So you pick a system you can learn a lot from, and therefore the next migration that you start to take, it's going to be that much easier, right? So you want to pick some of these, get some early wins, learn a lot, and start to build this team of knowledge, right? Whether it's people or a repository of knowledge, so people can refer to this as they start attacking other systems down the line. So here's an example of, there's multiple reports that WQF creates. This is the summary report, all right? So in this system that we scan, right, it produces the results for both MySQL or Postgres. Now it says RDS, MySQL, RDS, Postgres. The same results apply to Aurora, MySQL, Aurora, Postgres, because Postgres, whether it's Aurora or RDS, is 100% compatible between them, right? We've kept them API compatible, so the DDLs and the stored procedure logic, everything is identical, so the results carry over. We're showing you the results of, we scanned your source database and we're estimating what the effort is going to be moving to either MySQL or Postgres. Excuse me. And we've assigned at the top of this is the WQF category. This system was assigned a category 3, okay? And the details, which we don't have in the slide, is just because this was a source Oracle system that was using some object types that don't exist in either MySQL or Postgres, so there's more work involved than actually working around it, right? If you look at the bottom right, you see that the number of days actually is not much, right? And one thing that you keep in mind when you're looking at the estimate, if you run this tool yourself, the overall estimate, right, the number of days, is not just to convert the DDL and the SQL or the Transact SQL. It's, excuse me, the effort to do the overall migration project. The analysis, the prep, the planning, the conversion, the testing, and the rollout to production, all right? So that number might seem, like when you look at a 14-person team, it might seem crazy, 14 people for something that only takes a day, right? We're looking at the overall migration project. There's obviously different people at each stage, and that's why you end up with, something saying 14 people, because your application developer is not going to roll this out to production. He's not going to be doing the testing, right? So just be aware of that. It might look a little strange, but that's the reasoning behind it. And that specific example, I'm totally agree. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? That number. We are working. This was my example to say this just isn't realistic. If you look at the MySQL result, that looks a little bit more realistic. It's 80 days, 14 people. That makes sense, right? The Postgres one, we have to adjust that. Right? We're trying to build in what a person would do in their logic, right? And it's only as good as it's coded, right? And right there is an issue with that. We're going to fix that. No, well, when WQF, yes, all right, so the same thing with SCT, it can scan application code. When you go through the WQF setting up, you add in either physical components, which are like the physical pieces of hardware for sizing, or logical components. Logical components are the schema within the database, or you point it to application code. Let's say you have Java code, and it actually scans that, looking for SQL statements and gauging how difficult it is to migrate that. So it does take application logic into play. All right. Here's the migration estimate. And here's where, I was cautioning you on the previous slide, looking at 14 days, there's different phases in a migration project, right? These are the 12 different steps, right? Dave summarized to 4 steps of the overall, there's 4 high-level steps. But if you look at the actual migration steps, the roles, there's 12. And you can see in this particular case, this is shown for the MySQL, it amounts to total 80 days, but you can see the number of people at each step of the way, the number of days those people are expected to do the work, right? So this is going to help you, estimate, is this system, what's the effort, right? Obviously, how difficult is it going to be to migrate this, right? One of the things that we've added into the most recent release, because this kind of assumes that everybody working on this project is equal, right? But if this is your first migration, right, compared to working with someone that's done these migrations before, obviously the skill level affects the number of days, the overall effort. So one of the new features in the tool is there's a section on the spreadsheet where you can add in or adjust relative skill. So if I know I'm working with someone that's done migrations before, has done an Oracle to Postgres migration, I'm going to rate them higher than someone that's doing it for the first time, right? And then if I adjust that, the number of days is likely to go down because they can do a lot more things a lot more quickly, okay? So schema conversion tool. All right, schema conversion tool, as we've been saying, you use it to convert your database objects to the new target database platform, right? And, you can convert any number of source databases to targets like Postgres or MySQL, right? My favorite is always Postgres. If you're going from Oracle, the Postgres is most similar to Oracle, so it usually makes that migration much, much easier. If you have an Oracle database that's really just a collection of tables and some data, you can move that to MySQL. That's fine, right? You can move it to Postgres too, right? Because Postgres handles just tables data just as well as MySQL. It's really a personal preference at that point. We're all Postgres people in the room, so we're obviously going to talk about moving to Postgres. Even if you're going to, SQL Server, if you have complex transact SQL, MySQL has a stored procedure language, but Postgres is a lot more advanced. So it's going to be easier to migrate that system over to Postgres as compared to something like MySQL, all right? And you also, with SCT, you can migrate your data warehouse, as we talked about with the data extractors. SCT, some of the main features, and we're going to look at examples of this in the next few slides, is you've got the assessment report, right? WQF gives you one level of inventory analysis, all right? In the background, WQF runs SCT to collect some of the inventory information. But it doesn't produce the more detailed assessment reports that would be very useful to you once you identify a system you want to migrate. Now you want to look at the migration issues. So you can start to formulate plans on how to remediate those migration issues. That's what you're going to use the assessment report for. So if I was migrating from Oracle to Postgres, I'm going to take SCT, I'm going to connect to my source Oracle database, I'm going to run SCT to create an assessment report, tell it that my target is Postgres, and it's going to actually attempt to convert all of your database objects to Postgres. And wherever it runs into an issue, right? It's going to log that issue. And then you're going to be able to view the report, their PDF report, or within the tool itself, right? And you'll be able to see the issue, click onto it, be brought right to the code that needs modifying, and you'll see what SCT tried to convert it to, right? And usually if there's an issue, it's going to comment the problematic code in the new Postgres source, so you can just look for the comment and figure out where the problem is and then recode as needed to get that object to work in the Postgres database. So that's the use of the assessment report. It does provide high-level stats about number of objects it scanned and number of objects that were able to be automatically converted. So you'll see some nice percentages. The percentages are the database storage objects, like the tables, the indexes, the constraints are usually extremely high. DDL between databases is relatively easy. Your database business logic, your PL SQL code over to PL PG SQL can vary greatly depending on what you're doing in the source Oracle PL SQL, right? So, we're always trying to improve that. So if you are using this tool, right, and you see something that you think, hey, you know what, this probably could be automated, let us know, right? Because we release new releases of SCT about every 6 weeks. So we're always adding in new capabilities into the tool, mainly coming directly from working with customers. So please let us know, all right? Converts the schema code, we talked about it, and of course, extracting data warehouse data into other data targets like Redshift. So here's an assessment report, the high-level executive summary. And in there, if you could actually read it, you'll see the percentages. I mean, this system was a migration over to MySQL, just showing you what it produces. You've got your bars that the picture tells 1,000 words. So your green is no problem whatsoever, automatically converted. Your blue means that you need some simple, or a medium complexity type of remediation. And, well, yellow is the complex, more complex, and then be red, which says hard, right? That's something you're going to probably have to re-architect. Dave mentioned the example earlier, like advanced queuing. Everything to do with advanced queuing will show up red, right? Because we can't automatically convert that today. You actually need to re-architect your application to use another service like SQS or another open source tool like ActiveMQ to provide the queuing mechanism and just use the database as a data store, right? But that requires you, the user, the application developer, to change the way your application behaves, right? Because it is a big change in functionality, so that'll always show up as red, a very difficult issue. Here's what the SCT tool looks like. On the left-hand side, you've connected to your Oracle, in this case, a source Oracle database, and I can browse all my schemas. I've run an assessment report. Connecting with assuming my target is Aurora Postgres, right? In the middle, at the top, those are the issues that were found when converting this schema, right? There's 2 issues there that show up as gray, right? Those are warnings, okay? It doesn't mean that you'll actually run into a problem, but it's something you need to be aware of. The first one is hints, right? By default, Aurora Postgres, RDS Postgres, they don't have hints because the community doesn't natively in the core support database hints, right? There is an extension to Postgres that you have to enable in order to use hints. SCT doesn't know if you've had that extension enabled, right? So it just raises this warning that, hey, you're using hints. Hints are treated as comments if they're actually not supported. So as you're going through your testing, you're going to figure out, do I really need hints in Postgres? If I do, I'm going to enable the PG hint plan extension, and I'll add that, make sure the hints are shown syntactically proper in the SQL statements, okay? Second warning here is about time zone, right? This is all based on how you configured the machine, right? And when people are doing test migrations, they don't look at that type of thing, and they just quickly try to migrate. When they execute, especially with dates, time zones and time settings are always out of whack. So it's like, hey, before you do that, stop, make sure you set up your target system, at the same time zone, everything that the source system is coming from, and that'll solve that problem. This third issue here is more complex. All right, so I've clicked on this, I've expanded the issue here, and you see on the bottom left, you see the Oracle source. Okay, and you see what's highlighted, that's the actual statement that SCT is unable to automatically convert. Okay? Now on the right-hand side is the PL PG SQL that SCT creates as part of this migration. Now if I scroll down on there, this particular assignment statement would be commented out, right? Because it doesn't know how to handle that, right? So you've got to look at what is, this source function is actually pretty easy, pretty simple, right? And what it's conceptually doing, right? And I would rewrite this thing. I'd actually remove the code from the Oracle, the Postgres side, and I'd rewrite it in one of two ways. One, using Postgres arrays. It all depends on how that data is being passed out to the calling application, right? How you would rewrite that. Or even more elegant is using a SQL function that does a set of returning function. And that actually, it's like 5 lines of code if you indent the statement nice, or it's one long SQL statement that solves that problem, right? So, you can edit that right here in the tool. It is kind of like a SQL developer type of tool where you can make the code modification and apply that to the target database, all right? But right here, you can see all the issues. You can drill down into the details, see it, and fix it right here and then. So the question was asked about applications. All right, so here's showing in SCT. If you go into the application conversion settings, you tell it where the files are, because it's basically going to read the files like they're text files, right? So you have Java class files, you have source files, you have a SQL script, right? You can point SCT to it. It's going to interpret, parse through those files, looking for SQL statements, and try to convert the SQL statement. If it can do it, that's good. It'll report that. If it has issues, it's going to report the issues. Okay, so it's an easy way, not just the database, but to look at your application code to get you started with the application migration. All right, and then the next tool that we're going to be talking about is DMS. So here I've just migrated all my DDL for the tables and the constraints and everything. The next step is to populate the target database, and you'd be using DMS. So SCT is integrated with DMS that I configure my AWS service profile, and from within the tool itself, I can generate migration tasks, right? And then while the tests are running, I can monitor, right? Now this stuff is, the monitoring and everything, and you creating the task is also available in the DMS console, but here's one way within a single tool to move from one step to the next step. Yes? Mm-hmm. It's a brand new feature. I'm not familiar with the details of it, but if we'll share your contact information, I'll get you more details. It was just released with the latest release of SCT. Okay, so let's dig into database migration service a little. All right, so we talked about this. You're going to use it to actually do your migration. You can also use it to replicate. Usually when you're doing a migration, you're doing a combination of the two, right? Because a migration is not a one-time thing. You want to migrate the base data. You want to keep capturing the incremental changes in the source, so you always have the two systems up to date. So you're testing. You can test here, and compare with the same set of data, right? So you usually are combining that, and you're going to, do this operation more than once, right? Because you're doing it once to set up your development environment, migrating everything over, making the changes at the database level, the application level, and then of course when you're ready to go to, or even before production, you've got your staging, your other environments, your testing environments, and then finally you're going to be doing the same type of thing with your production environments. And because of the CDC functionality, it helps you have minimal downtime migration, production switchovers, right? Because it's capturing the deltas and you're keeping the databases in sync. So once it finishes the synchronize, you just point your application to the new target database, and hopefully all is good from that point on. DMS, when you set up, when you define the replication instance and you start creating your task, before you actually run the task, it has its own assessment. So it checks, right, that you don't have data types mapped to crazy data types, right? It does some type of sanity check. So you find the problems before you sit there and wait for this, migration to actually occur, right? So it's a nice extra step. Once you go through and you're running your replication task, and then you can track the progress, and you'll see the progress of the data being moved over. You can also have data validation turned on, right? Because you want to make sure the data you're pulling out is the same data and no one has interfered with it. So it basically does a checksum of the data coming in and data going into the target system, right? So you can be sure that no one tampered with the data. Now, for some migrations, right, you're not going to want to send all your data over the network, right? So we do have Snowball integration. Snowball is the device that we can ship to you, and you can plug it into your data center, load your data in there, ship it back to us. We plug it into our backplane, and you do a bulk load of the data, right? So you can use DMS, and basically have DMS know that Snowball is going to do that initial load, and DMS is going to pick up with the CDC. And so the DMS console, we saw a little bit of monitoring within SCT that kind of shows the progress. There's a progress bar, and you see the number of tables migrated, number of rows migrated. But that gives you at the database level type of thing, table statistics. You can see that in DMS. You'll see on the next slide. But there's also environmental things that you need to be aware of when using DMS, because DMS is an instance that is sitting between your target and your source database. Right? So because we're converting between databases, I mean, the DMS can move data between the same database, but in our case, we're migrating off of Oracle and we're going over to Postgres. Some transformation, is necessary from the data types, the data type format, and any transformation that you define within the tool, because you can define additional transformations. And so that is done on this replication instance. So we extract the data from, let's say, Oracle, and we're putting that into CSV format in memory on the replication instance, and then it is loaded into the Postgres side. All right, so you want to make sure you've configured that instance. You chose an instance size that can accommodate the amount of data that you're going to be pushing through that, right? So you're going to monitor things at that replication instance host level, look at the throughput of the data coming in, making sure it's equal to the data going out and there isn't any lag. And by looking at this data, you can identify problems, environmental type of problems that might be one cause of, slow migrations. Then there's the table level statistics, right? We saw this in SCT. Here's just an example on the DMS console. So it gives you all the stats. Here are the tables. We can load tables in parallel. You can specify the number of parallel streams to configure, and we'll migrate over there, and you'll see your rows populating and incrementing as it's loading. DMS, I mean, you can use it via SCT. You can use it through the console. But if you're doing mass migrations, and most companies these days want to automate every step of this way, we have a CLI, right? And everything you can do within the console and everything actually uses the CLI behind the scenes. So here's just showing some of the basic steps for using DMS. You first create your replication instance. You configure endpoints, your source Oracle database, your target Aurora Postgres. You create your replication task saying, I want to replicate Schema A from Oracle, right, over to Schema B. I want to make sure that when I do the migration, I'm converting all the identifiers, the names, whether they're tables, schema, or columns, from what's in the Oracle Data Dictionary, which is uppercase, fold it to lowercase, because everything in Postgres folds to lowercase in the system catalog. And you don't want to have to change your application to refer to everything with double quotes to maintain that uppercase. So transformations you always want to have part of your replication task is convert everything to lowercase, right? The schema, the table, the column level, right? 3 basic transformations, all right? Once you define your task, right, with those transformations, then you run your replication task, and then you can monitor it through the command line as well. Some additional useful information. All right, we talked about, and I talked about when we were looking at SCT, a case where there was an object type that didn't convert over automatically with SCT. All right, this stuff, it's in my head. I've been doing these migrations. We're getting a lot better at documenting this stuff. One place you can look for these types of differences and ways to get around those differences, we've launched a bunch of playbooks, migration playbooks. So there's playbooks that explain to you in detail, here's the Oracle feature, here's the Postgres feature, here's the high level thing. You click on the link, it'll bring you to a description and some code examples, right, to get you started on remediating those migration issues, right? And we'll, every time we have new capabilities, we'll obviously be updating this. If you see things as you're using these tools, please, as I mentioned before, provide the feedback so we can make these tools work for you. So with that, I obviously have some time for some questions. So, yes?
What are the licensing implications? That's one. Second one is, can we set up this Intel
The three tools, there are three different deployment models, right? WQF is offered as an AMI that you spin up a new EC2 instance based on. So the cost for that is the cost of the EC2 instance. That's definitely running in AWS Cloud. That can be done on site today. SCT is a tool you download, right? So you can put it on an EC2 instance. It's already on the WQF instance that you spin up, or you download it on your workstation, and there's no cost to that whatsoever. You can connect that to whatever source target that you want. DMS is a service that only runs in the cloud. All right. There's been talk about, you may have heard of Outposts. It's like take a piece of the Amazon cloud and put it in your data center, about getting some of these services into there. So maybe down the line that'll be offered. Right now, DMS is a cloud-only service. And from a cost, DMS, depending on what you're doing, there is the concept of free DMS, and there's certain thresholds. If you use it and you stay under those thresholds, it's 100% free. But once you start exceeding those thresholds in certain instance sizes, then you're paying for the size of the instance, not the service, right? Because DMS will run on, let's say, an R2 4x large, and you're paying that cost of what the R2 4x large is. Okay.
I mean, it makes sense to have WQF run locally because you're going to be scaling that.
Totally understand. This is the first release, or we got it out there so people can start using it, so we can improve the the functionality, test it out, improve it over time. So totally understand. We're moving towards a convergence process. All these things, because they're related, right? You're going to use, if you're using one, you're probably going to use the other. We want them accessible through a single interface, right? So, but that's down the line. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The CDC, once you enable it, once you start it, it just continually runs, right? And then your job is to monitor it, right? But if you, yeah, it's like any other, CDC, it captures from the logs, it sages and pumps, and it keeps doing that, yeah. Yep. Yes?
Are there any studies what size of instance for DMS do you need to have throughout the
Yeah, it all depends on how much data you're going to be pushing, how much data at one time, right? Whether you're doing more of a sequential load, or you want to set up, like, say, 10 parallel instances, to group tables and pipe that through. Obviously, that would need a larger replication instance. Nothing stops you from having multiple replication instances, right, and splitting it out so you're not consuming the same resources, or you just spin up one very large replication instance, right? So, we could probably have conversations. I don't have metrics to say if you have this much data, this is what size instance, but I know our DMS team has been doing this a lot longer than I have some stats in their head.
Keep in mind that with all of the data, there are services that you get wrong, no big deal, you just make it. Right? You can auto resize those.
Yes.
And what's estimated impact of additional load on the source system?
The CDC, I believe, and you're going to see potentially about a 10%. You could probably see more if you create a bunch of different replication instances, right, to parallelize a large move, because you're basically starting connections. Each instance has to connect to the source database, right? So the more connections you have, the more impact. And basically what it does, right, is, everything is trying to read the log files, right? So they're a single stream, probably going to see about 10% impact on the source system.
What do you mean single stream?
You set up one replication instance, one replication task, right? It's going to go read the log file, right? The Oracle log file in this case, right? And migrate it over there, because and as it's reading the log file, there's a potential for a 10% hit on that source system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Do any of the conversion tools want the fourth read of log conversion? Because VS with the big blobs,
Mm-hmm.
there's a limitation on the size of the blob.
Yeah, that's really going to be in the configuration of your replication task. You specify how to handle the lobs, right? So you can chunk it, and you can specify the chunk size, right? You can just ignore lobs if you really want. We usually recommend, if you're saying you have a system that has a lot of lobs, Is database the best place for it, or would it be better to move those lobs to S3 buckets and just have the pointer to the S3 bucket in the database, right? It makes it easier to manage. We've done that for customers before, improved efficiency, right? Because the database is smaller, easier to manage, if that works for your case, right? But in the task configuration or definition itself, you get to say how to handle those blobs.
So I want to know beforehand, before I start the migration, if my blobs will be a problem.
No, right, because SCT, they will convert the table definition, but it doesn't know anything about the actual data. It never looks at the physical data. The only time we look at the data is when you actually go to replicate it using DMS.
Is there an option to use DMS to create a baseline data, so that you're not replicating everything? Is there an option available, like logical backup, you take a snapshot, and then anything incremental, use DMS to?
Well, their DMS, can be used for both pieces. You're talking about like a snapshot, taking a one-time copy of that, right? DMS can do that. DMS can also just do the CDC. If you don't want to use DMS for that snapshot, you want to use whatever method, like extract the CSV, load it into Postgres, but use DMS for the CDC, absolutely you can do that, right? It's just like using Snowball to move the large databases. You can still have DMS. It knows Snowball is doing that snapshot replication. It's only going to take care of the CDC from that point on. Yes?
Is DMS multi-AZ enabled?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And let's assume I'm doing production migration, and in the middle of data migration, DMS crashes.
Yep.
How to reestablish synchronization of this process?
Well, when you specify it's multi-AZ, you're basically creating a copy of that replication instance in the task configuration in the other AZ, right? So it should fail over. Now, forgive me, I haven't actually gone through the steps to tell you exactly how it works, but that's the nature of creating the multi-AZ. If it goes down in the one AZ, the other AZ starts up and picks up where it left off.
But in terms of data, I don't need to restart
No.
this crash.
No. When you go into them, and the task is going to stop, you go in there and you resume it, right? So if there's an option, to resume the replication task, and it picks up where it left off. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, feel free to grab us, if you see us in the hall or anything, and hopefully you have some success with your migration projects. All right. Thank you.